Hello and welcome to Fast Talk, your source for the science of endurance performance. I'm your host, Trevor Connor, here with Coach Grant Holicky. Mental strength techniques are not going to make you stronger. That's a point frequently made by people who don't see a value in sports psychology, and the fact is, they're right. Things like visualization and self-talk are not going to make you stronger. So then why do we do these things? The answer is simple. A racer can arrive at the start line with the strength to win the event, but what ultimately is going to determine their result is whether they have the mental fortitude to tap into their full power, or if they mentally collapse before the gun even goes off. The tactics taught in sports psychology allow you to make the most of the strength you have, and many athletes discover, once they start practicing these techniques, just how much of their physiological gifts they weren't actually using before. Dr. Brian Zuleger is a professor of applied sports psychology at Adams State University. He teaches a graduate program in sports psychology for coaches that our own Grant Holicky graduated from. In today's episode, he explains to us why we shouldn't just visualize optimal outcomes, why we should focus on goal attainment instead of goal setting, why we should use more instructional self-talk and leave motivational self-talk to Stuart Smalley, and finally, he gives us some tips on how to build self-confidence. Joining Dr. Zuleger, we'll also hear from Professor of Physiology, Dr. Ernst Hansen, and author of The Brave Athlete, Dr. Simon Marshall. So, visualize listening to the best podcast ever, and let's make you fast. Coaches, we have exciting news. Now you can get certified in the polarized training method. Fast Talk Labs has collaborated with USA Triathlon to provide the first ever polarized training certification from a U.S. Olympic Federation. This course includes an in-depth look at the 80-20 training method with extensive contributions for Dr. Stephen Seiler, myself, Trevor Connor, physiologist Alan Cousins, triathlon coach Ryan Bolton, and my Fast Talk podcast co-host Rob Pickles. Complete the Polarized Training Certification course and you can become one of the first Polarized Training certified coaches in the world. Take advantage of the excitement surrounding the 80-20 training method in this 2024 Olympic year. Learn more at triathlonlearning.com. Just search for Polarized Training Certification.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Fast Talk. We're super excited this week to have a friend of mine, a mentor of mine, and the head of the sports psychology department at Adams State University, Brian Zuleger. Welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I'd like to start with you telling us a little bit about you, but I want to take a moment here and say a little bit about what we're trying to talk about on the show today. So what we're really looking to talk about is, you've heard us talk about, particularly me, a lot of mental strength and where it applies and how it works in sport. But what we haven't spent a lot of time talking about yet is the specifics of how to do it. Actionable items of how we can personally work on our mental strength for our performance and outside of sport, just performance in life. And that's something that you, Brian, talk about a lot, is that holistic athlete, everything in the athlete. And we'll get into this a lot as we go through the episode. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your past, how you got to this point, and where we're going from there?
Yeah, coming up on 40 years old this year, so that's a long story. So the short version is I wanted to coach at the college level, and a lot of times you need a master's degree to kind of advance up to being a head coach, which was my long-term goal, was to be a head track and field and cross-country coach at a university somewhere. And so in that process, I took a sports psychology class, and funny story is I actually got a B on an exam, and that's what led me to go into office hours to talk to the professor, who at that point I hadn't had a formal relationship with. I was just another student in class, and I was coaching track and field at the same time, and so I was helping as a volunteer assistant coach and getting that coaching experience and learning while I was doing that. I was actually finishing up my undergraduate degree at the time, and I was taking all these classes. I had like 6 or 7 classes because I was behind. I was like a fifth year when I should have already graduated, kind of thing. But long story short there is I went into his office hours and left that signing up for his master's degree program. And his story is that he was a college track and field coach and a sports psychology professor. And back in the day, that was more common to kind of do both of those things. And over the years, he retired from coaching and was just a professor then. And that was kind of, in that meeting, basically realized, hey, the sports psychology piece is a big piece of the puzzle when it comes to coaching and training athletes and working with people in general. And and was looking at, okay, where can I maybe do that and also continue to study? And that led me to doing a PhD in sports psychology. And then in that pathway, I got in this intersection of doing a lot of coaching education stuff. My mentor there was a former head track and field coach and sports psychology professor as well. And in that process, really realized there's a lot of people who are coaching and they don't have a lot of time to do a lot of coaching education. And there's a lot of people who are doing research and they don't have a lot of time to do coaching education. And so I sort of felt like there was this gap. There was people who had lots of knowledge in the research stuff. There were people who had lots of knowledge on the applied side as coaches, but nobody was really there to teach coaches in a formal way outside of, hey, I'm your assistant coach and I learn from you in that kind of manner. And so that kind of said, okay, where does sports psychology and coaching education kind of mix? And that's where both my master's and my PhD programs really were doing that. And I didn't see a lot of other people necessarily doing that or doing it in a way that I felt was connecting to the people in the way that they needed to be connected to. And so here I am now, 10 years into being a professor, and started a master's degree program in applied sports psychology to fill that need to get that education, which fortunately I get to meet awesome people like yourself through that. And so that's the work I'm doing.
Yeah. And one of the things I kind of want to put out there, I went through the sports psychology department at Adams State. There's also a master's in coaching available at Adams State. Mm-hmm. Just a really nice selection of master's degrees there that really can enhance what a lot of coaches out there are trying to do.
So something that I listened to the two of you talk about before we started recording here that I think is a really important context for this episode is you brought up, you hear from athletes who go, oh, so this mental training techniques, that's supposed to replace training, that's going to make me stronger. And that's kind of how people look down on it. And this is something I've experienced both as an athlete and as a coach. No, that's not what this is about. I have seen in myself, I have seen in every athlete that I coach, there is a point where they are strong enough to do what they want to do, whether it's race, whether it's throw down with their friends on the local ride on Saturday, whether it's the big Grand Fondo that they want to go to, but they aren't able to do it yet, even though they're strong enough. And that is where that mental side comes in. The mental side is about teaching you to be able to use everything that's available to you, because you might have the fitness, but you can't always make yourself use it.
Well, in taking that, and this is really where I'd like this episode to go, is this idea of we talk about it in theory, and we'll talk about it a lot in theory today, but how does a random person put that into practice? And why does it matter? Trevor, you really touched on why it matters. And one of the things I think you've said a lot to me is this isn't about inventing some degree of fitness. This is about how to bring out what's inside of us already.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a core concept that sets the stage for a lot of things is the idea that we're thinking. We're always thinking. And I hear people sort of along these lines of what we're talking about here is like, oh, mental training is something that's separate from my physical training, right? And it's like, well, no, when I'm training, I'm thinking. In sports psychology, what I'm trying to do, and as a mental performance coach, is train people to think more effectively while they're training and then in competition. I take that into my competition then, right? And I think a lot of times with sports psychology on that note is people try to like conjure it up in competition, but they don't train it, right? Like, and that's where the problem comes. And then they'll maybe come to somebody like me and go, well, it's not working in competition. And often I go back to, well, what does your training look like? Are you training this? And if you're not training it, it's likely not going to happen on race day.
Let's pause for a minute to hear from Dr. Simon Marshall, who explains how our mindset can either enhance or completely neutralize our strengths.
For some people, it makes them go faster. For others, it makes them go slower. It's interesting, isn't it? When you start to sort of formalize the competition part, that's one way pinning a number on really is one of the most overt signs of direct, head-to-head competition that you can get. For some people, they seem to sort of buckle under it, and other people rise to the challenge. And often one of the reasons for the difference is really about the architecture or the brand of your chimp brain, right? So folks who are worried about feeling a bit imposterish, or they might worried about social approval, they might have more anxiety. Other people who are the way that their chimp shows dominance is by everything's a competition. I can't wait to put on a number and so on. And it helps them perform. We do know that competing with other people makes you faster. Pretty much the literature is almost universally consistent, whether it's from time to exhaustion on a treadmill or a bike that has speed at which you can wind a fishing reel in, how far you can throw things. When you're around other people and they're doing the same thing as you and you're being compared to them, you get better. Now, the challenge, of course, for athletes is trying to convince them that you will be better, even though that you're terrified and you hate this, you will be better. And so that really is where the psychological piece comes in. I said that we could talk for an hour just on this topic. So one of the big issues is what we call a participant versus a competitor mindset. And the way that materializes in sort of everyday normal person world is the athlete who says, "Oh, I just want to enjoy it. I just want to have a good time. No one is saying that that's a bad thing. Of course, we want to enjoy a competition. But when you put on a number, and many people don't feel as though that they have I'm not competitive, or I'm just going to somehow, if I can give every reason ahead of time about why the outcome is the way it is, I can never truly, my talent or abilities or however they're interpreting them can never truly be measured, right? Is because, this is what we often call self-sabotaging. And self-sabotaging, for the folks who number pinning, they get nervous, is the default strategy for them. So we try and unpick the self-sabotaging. So in other words, if you remove all of the obstacles to why you couldn't have performed. So in other words, I just did this, it's just a training day, or I didn't sleep that well last night, or it's raining, or all the reasons that we give. Of course, the real reason for all of these things is because the worst thing that you can do to your chimp is to say there were no barriers, no excuses for why you hid. Do you know what the actual answer is after you've done this? You're just not good enough. You don't have what it takes. Your chimp will shit the bed. So what the human brain does is it implants little things along the way, so it never has to say, everything went according to plan, and you know what, I still came up short. So the strategy is to undo some of the self-sabotaging mechanisms, learn how to evaluate, change people's fundamental relationship with failure, which is, we talk about effort and attitude versus performance and goals and podiums and so on. And when you can do that, your performance takes dramatic leaps. Leslie was a mid-pack pro for much of her early. She was an ITU athlete from 19 to 21. Left the sport because of all those reasons. I'm not taking credit for it, but we worked together on it. She got more confident in the sport. She got to a point where she literally has no more left in the suitcase. She doesn't care. She does a local cross country in San Diego. There's a target on her back. Everyone wants to beat her. Now you have to have, and she's just done 40 hours of training. She's tired. She's already done a session in the morning, and she's turning up to this race. That, for most people's chimps, is like, oh my God, every race has to be my A race. So if you can get to the point where you can run unshackled or race on it, you don't care about this, it's all process focused, but still be that competitor mindset. No, I'm just out for that's the sweet spot. And if you can manage that and develop that, the world opens up to you athletically. It really does. We've seen it time and time again.
So really quickly, one of the things that you talk about a lot is this idea of we have to build it, not fix it. And so taking a moment here as we're talking about general perceptions of mental performance, you kind of just noted it. A lot of people come and say, well, my brain's not working right. I need you to fix me. Mm-hmm. But that's not really what we're looking at here. It's not something that we can do all of a sudden.
Yeah, and we're not broken necessarily, right? And so it's this idea that where are we at? We're trying to create a baseline, right? And establish what that baseline is. We do that in a lot of different ways in sport and training. We do all sorts of testing and things like that. Any coach in any sport, you come out, one of the first things they do? They're running you through various drills or tests to kind of see, okay, where are people at? Where are things that people are maybe better at than others? Where are things that we need to work on and stuff like that, right? Well, trying to do the same thing from a mental standpoint is just kind of figure out where you're at. What's your mindset? How do you think? How do you respond when you face adversity and things like that, right? And then from there, it's not that that's good or bad per se. It's just saying, okay, this is where we're at and how do we build from here, right? And it's also an educational and strengths-based approach. A lot of times people look at this as interventional. I'm struggling, I need to get back to normal or whatever it is, right? And it's like, no, I'm not necessarily concerned even with getting you back to normal. I want to optimize and get you to be the best version of yourself. Well, that's not getting back to normal. That's going well beyond that, ideally, right? And so that isn't really what the focus is. It's more about education and training and saying, okay, what do I already do well and how do I build on that, instead of saying, okay, like I'm good at focusing, but I'm terrible at responding to mistakes. So I'm going to put all my time and energy into how I respond to mistakes. And it's like, well, no, that's misguided. That would, we want to lean on what you do well and then build off of that kind of thing. So that's kind of the general concept there with that build it model versus fix it model. I think that alone is just such a huge shift for so many athletes and people in sport, is to kind of say, okay, I don't have to have a problem to work on this kind of thing. And when you start there, that makes a big difference.
I think of it as a skill set. It's a skill set that you can develop. And just like training, it's also something you can lose if you don't keep up. So we've talked about this before on the show. I remember the last Pro 1 race that I did where I went, I can't do this anymore. It was Cascades 2017. And I was more than strong enough. All the numbers were there. The strength was there. I just remember the first day in the road race being at the back of the field and unable to get to the front. And it had nothing to do with strength. It was whatever mental skills I used to have that made it very easy for me to get at the front, be at the right place to race the race. I hadn't done a race that big in like a year and a half, and they were just gone. Yeah. I hadn't been practicing them.
And you bring up a really good point, and this is something we're really going to touch on today, is that whatever skills I had, I didn't have them anymore, but you were struggling to even identify what those skills were. So many of us develop these skills as athletes just along the way. We haven't realized we've done them. And then suddenly when they're gone, and sometimes it's not even suddenly, right? Sometimes it's just slowly but surely, because the rest of our life gets in the way and eats away at what we're able to do. We're 26, 27 years old, and I was racing Xterra. I didn't have anything else to do, really. I was coaching some swimming. I didn't have anybody to take care of. I wasn't worried about my kids or my family or anything like that. Now, that shift is completely different. Now I go home and my mental energy is to my children and to my wife and to those things. So how do I turn that on and turn that off? And that gets really difficult. Yeah.
It evolves over the course of our life, kind of thing. And this is another thing I see to this point of like, if we're not training it, you sort of lose it to some degree, is I'll have people maybe talk to me or somebody like me as a mental performance coach, maybe one time, and they maybe came to me in a case where they were struggling with something or whatever, and I give them something to work on and it helps. And then I'll maybe never hear from that person again.
Yep.
Right? And so I'm kind of thinking like, well, maybe they're continuing to do that. Maybe they're not. But it's this idea that, I use the analogy, like you get a prescription or whatever, you're supposed to take it for 14 days. Most people take it for 7 or 8. They start to feel better and they stop, kind of thing, right? Like there's this idea that you have to continue to do it. And there's a maintenance component to this, right? Just like there's a maintenance component to our fitness, right? And it doesn't have to be like this 1% better every day concept either. It's just simply working on these things and maintaining it even. It's not that I always have to be improving even, but I see so often that people kind of do something and it kind of helps. And then they like forget about it and stop doing it because they haven't formally trained it. And again, that's where if you're coming in that sort of interventional context, you maybe use that thing, that strategy or whatever, that skill in that moment, and it helps. But then if you haven't really trained it and gotten it to be part of your subconscious, really eventually is what you're trying to do. So that in those pressure moments, in sort of the heat of the moment, you can rely on that, because that's what you're relying on most of the time is your subconscious in those moments. And if you haven't trained it well, it's not going to be there when you really need it.
Well, and that's I love that idea of the subconscious, right? This is the technical definition of choking, is to be putting conscious thought towards something that should be rote, something that we just know how to do. Somebody goes up, they're going to take a free throw, they're a 90% free throw shooter, and suddenly they miss. 9 times out of 10, they're aware of the situation and they're up there trying to think about, push the ball, follow through, and our bodies can't keep up with our brain. So if we're thinking about it actively, we're already in trouble. So as you talk about it, building this into the subconscious, it may not just be a physical movement, it's a mental pathway that we have to really burn in and know and have available.
Yeah, and to your point about the free throw example, it's like I can shoot that in the gym, okay, and then, I can go shoot that in a game, but now it's the championship and we're down 1, and it's a 1-1. If I make it, we tie. If I make the next one, we win, kind of thing, right? In that moment, have you trained for that moment mentally as well? And that's, again, where, like, as you progress through, just like any other skill, there's a progression to it, right? And so, yeah, you practice that in the gym with nobody else around. And I see people do that a lot, metaphorically, in a lot of sports. But then they don't take it into the actual, like, nuance of, like, okay, I'm in this exact situation and I've prepared for it. So then they get in those situations and then they're trying to dial it up and they can't. And again, it's like, well, I haven't trained for that scenario.
So just so you know, a free throw is kind of like a penalty shot in hockey. Okay. I just wanted to make sure you were following because you're, foreign.
Yeah. So 2019, who won the NBA championships? Do you remember this?
Oh, yeah. No.
I was there.
Oh, you were there?
Yes.
Wow.
Toronto Raptors.
Oh, that's not really Canadian, though.
Yeah, well, for a week I followed basketball.
Anyway.
So I am looking at this outline, very happy about the fact that for once I didn't have to put together the outline. And the two of you have put together what you're calling 4 real-world examples of mental strength.
Yeah.
So should we dive into these?
Yeah, I think it's time to get into them. And where I wanted to start with you, Brian, is the idea of visualization. And I really wanted to talk about this because I grew up in a sport, swimming, in the 1980s, where visualization was all the rage. We did it all the time. We sat down and had our coaches talk us through, okay, now picture the perfect race and touch the wall and look back and see the time. And there was so much about this idea of visualize your perfect scenario, visualize the race going perfectly. And while I think there's a lot of effectiveness in that, and there can be a lot of benefit in that, and we can get into the technical piece of, like, your brain does struggle to differentiate between an active memory and something we've created. But when we get a little too fixated on the perfect, we're losing real world application of this technique.
Yeah, absolutely. And a quick note on the element of perfect, and I won't get too deep on this, but I teach that there is no such thing as perfect. And I say that because so often this idea of perfect is one of the huge things that athletes causes problems for them from a mindset standpoint, is they are trying to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And we are inherently imperfect, and competition is imperfect. It's chaotic, it's complex. And even when, people say they pitch a perfect game, or somebody breaks a world record, right? If you sit down and talk with that individual, they can always find areas where they made mistakes or could have been better. And you think, okay, this person just broke a world record. How could they be any better or make mistakes, right? And it's like, no, if you actually talk with them in their mind, they can pinpoint these things. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I'm like, well, why are we trying to be perfect? Why don't we just try to be as best as we can be in the context? And then that gives us some grace to know there's going to be some mistakes. And really what differentiates you then is how you respond to that, right? So then take that into this visualization. Yes, we want to think about it in a mastery orientation of things going well, not necessarily perfect, but going well. But we also want to think about some of these scenarios, right, that could potentially happen, whether it's challenge, adversity. And you can't prepare for anything. And many of these things, some of these things, you don't even know what's going to happen, right? We could go on and on of examples of this, right? And so it's a broader idea of how do I train for adversity from a visualization standpoint? And what are some common things that could happen in my particular sport or activity that I'm doing, right? From a performance standpoint. A quick example is okay, I do a lot of work with track and field athletes, right? Well, they have a meet schedule. The meet schedule often gets off. Things happen, whatever it is, and so the schedule gets off, right? So then how does that impact me? If I'm warming up at a certain time and I'm really oriented on I have to warm up at a certain time and I have to do this and this and this, and then you get all warmed up and then something happens and there's a delay. how do you handle that? Well, that's a thing that is pretty common in the sport. So I can prepare for that. I can visualize what that might look like so that when that happens, I'm not freaking out kind of thing with that, right? Or you get, if you're running a race where you got block starts, for example, or something like that, like you get held in the blocks a long time, or somebody false starts, right? Have I thought through what that's like and prepared for that? Or have I just prepared for it's going to be perfect, I'm going to get in the blocks, everything's going to go great, and goes out, and then all of a sudden there's a false start, this stuff happens, whatever. And you see that athlete, just to your point, like you were saying, everything physically speaking is primed and ready to go. But now all of a sudden their thoughts are starting to get to be ineffective because they're like, well, I wasn't, what about this?
And beyond even ineffective, maybe now there's a panic and we're off book. And one of the things I talk about a lot with my cyclocross athletes is we'll pre-ride a course, and they're pre-riding a course with almost nobody in front of them. So when they go through their head and they go through that course again, they're picturing it with nobody in front of them. So we'll come to certain sections of the course and say, all right, look at this course. Now remember, you have a third row start. There's 25 people in front of you. Where do you go? What's your out? What's the next step? What do we go through these pieces? And even that idea of what you're saying, what happens when you flat? What happens when you drop your nutrition in a gravel race, right? What's your backup plan? And so that might even not be a traditional visualization, but it's working through this stuff in our minds before we're there so that we have alternative plans, alternative flight routes.
Totally. And I think about courses, whether it's, cyclocross or a road race or whatever it might be, there's so many nuances to that, right? And in a perfect world, you can pre-ride the course, you can go through it, see what it is and stuff like that, right? Some cases you don't, right? Like I think of myself, I'm not a pro athlete or anything like that. So like in a lot of cases, you show up to a race or something like that, you're kind of figuring it out as you go, right? But nowadays we've got things like video and stuff like that where you can maybe watch a video online. Like I talk a lot about athletes like that. It's like, okay, has there been a race there before? Can you go on YouTube and maybe get some footage and kind of look at that and visualize and see what those things are like, right? And when you do that, you're priming your brain to be more ready for when it actually happens and you see it. You've kind of thought through these scenarios. And then to our point about earlier, how do I read and react to it in real time? Well, you can do that much better when you've thought through some of those things. But if you've thought it was going to go perfect and then all of a sudden some of these things happen, now all of a sudden your alarm system kind of is going off, like you said. And that has a physiological response to it, right? And that's where people kind of tighten up or their heart rate really spikes or something like that, right? And that's not what we want in those moments. And so if we're prepared for that, we can handle that a little better.
Well, I love that you brought up a little bit earlier when you were talking about not being perfect, pitching a perfect game. Because it made me think, so I'm trying to remember the name of this movie. I think it was called For the Love of the Game.
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
a Kevin Costner game.
movie.
Yeah.
A movie about where he was pitching a perfect game. Because what I loved in it, there was a great example of what I would consider a form of visualization, where he got up on the pitcher's mound. And I can't remember the exact wording he used, but in his head he said,
Clear the mechanism.
Clear the mechanism. That
Yep.
was it. And then the editors, made the whole sound of the audience or the crowd go away. And he was able to get into his mode and pitch. But then as he got to like the 7th or 8th inning, he did the same thing, clear the mechanism. And he couldn't do it.
Right.
And then he started to struggle.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great example of having your methodology, right? And we're going to come back to this over and over again, this idea of it's very holistic and it's very individualistic, right? What works for Trevor is not going to work for me. It's not going to work for Brian.
Yeah, we talked about that's all about anger.
Right? For Trevor, it's all about anger.
Yeah.
It is not about anger for me. But as we go through those things, and we're going to get to eyes off in a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about your individual zone of optimal functioning, which concerns me, but but
Don't make me angry.
you can have your individual thing, but even your individual thing may fail in a wicked environment when things are constantly changing, when it gets difficult, or even when it's going well. That's one of the hardest things that we run across in sport is, all right, now what do you do when you're going, oh God, I'm winning.
Yeah, I'm leading the race, right?
Right.
Like, and have you thought through that? Have you planned for that, right? Which, that ties into confidence and other things too, but like, I think I see that a lot. And that's, in terms of race strategy, that's something that comes up a lot. This idea of like, well, I don't want to lead, or, what if I am leading, or I'm leading, I'm not supposed to be leading,
right.
right. And that kind of stuff happens a lot. And in particular, I think in championship type events, because sometimes the people who are most talented or should be leading, they're maybe using a strategy that is different than what people would think they would. People would think they should be leading, but maybe in their mind, they're trying to conserve energy for a sprint finish, or they're going to make a move at a certain point, and you don't know when that is. You don't know what their strategy is necessarily. But if they're not doing what you thought they were going to do, and this is another thing I talk about a lot with people with visualization and race prep, is don't just visualize it going the way you think it's going to go. Visualize what if you're in the front. Visualize if the person who you thought was going to be in the front is sitting next to you all of a sudden, or you're like, oh, hey, the leaders are going to go out. I'm going to tuck in and kind of just sit behind them and get towed along. And let's say the leaders don't go out, and all of a sudden you're in that group and you're like looking around, and I have so many athletes, they just start to like panic because they hadn't thought through that scenario at all. They just assumed, oh, they're going to go do this, and I'm just going to kind of hop in line or whatever it is, or I'm going to be gapped and I'm just going to be back here. And then there isn't that gap. Or the reverse, they think there's not going to be a gap. And then somebody is like, hey, my only chance to win today is to just go from the front, and I'm going to see how long I can hold on. And then that person goes out there and everybody's kind of like, oh, crap, we weren't expecting that, right? Like, so how does those things impact you? And I think those are things that they happen in races all the time. And so why wouldn't you prepare for that to some degree?
And we talked about this with Matteo Jorgensen. You'd sent me that screenshot of his plan for Door Vlaanderen, and this was my mental plan. And then his team leader, Wout van Aert, crashes, and he talked about, well, could go back to my plan. This plan is still applicable. And he was able to adjust on the fly to a disaster, but the plan still applied and the mental protocol kind of still applied.
Yeah, and that's the important part about that to note too, is that you develop a plan that can adapt, right? Like we talk about, you brought up the baseball example, and there's ties to, without going deep into that story with Kevin Costner, if you've watched a lot of his sports related movies, they all have like a mental sports psychology kind of theme to them. Well, he is loosely connected to Augie Garrido, and when he was at Cal State Fullerton, and Augie Garrido was connected to Ken Ravizza, who is a sports psychology professor and mental performance coach. And Augie picked those things up, and Kevin picked up some things from watching Augie coach and being, on the sidelines at these baseball games and stuff. But going back to this idea of like, I have something that's set up. Well, one of the things Ken teaches is like, if you have a focal point, for example, for focusing in the context of baseball, it's finding something that's always going to be there. So one of the things they use as an example is the left field foul pole. Every Major League Baseball park, collegiate baseball park has a left field foul pole. So that is something that isn't going to change no matter what happens around me, right? And so when I develop a race plan or a visualization and I think through some things, I've got a system set up that can adapt to a lot of different situations. And it might be somewhat specific to that race or whatever, but in general, it's got some room for some adaptability because like we talked about, it's chaotic and it's complex, and you can't plan for some of this stuff, but you can plan to have a plan for like the unknown, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. So we've talked a lot about, all right, what are we doing specifically with our visualization, or making sure that we have visualization for when it goes wrong, for when it changes? How do we actually do that visualization? What are some techniques that can make that visualization more relatable to the sport itself?
Yeah, you want to think about what it feels like. And this is part of the visualization part that I think people think about what it looks like. And you want to think about what it feels like. Because then I have this sensation, right? Because the sport is physical in nature, right? So is my heart rate elevated in this particular time? Am I more relaxed in this particular moment? Am I going to, am I just kind of riding in the pack, or am I attacking a downhill and then, a very curvy section of the course or something like that, or whatever it might be? And taking those things into account in your visualization as well. One of the things that, I talk about with biking, for example, like you can get on a stationary bike, you can get on the trainer, and you don't have to do a workout per se, but you could do a little bit so that you are, one, actually doing the activity while you're visualizing, and two, you're getting a physiological stimulation to get you somewhat, not that you're maybe like, max heart rate per se, but you're doing something to kind of get you in that mindset. It's not like you have to sit with your legs crossed in a quiet room and close your eyes and visualize kind of thing. You can do some things to help make it more simulation-like for what you're going to face. Things like time orientation too, potentially. Obviously, if you've got a super long, endurance race, you're not going to sit and visualize for, 3 to 6 hours or whatever it is, right? But thinking through maybe sections of the course and how long is that section going to take? And so then I visualize roughly along that time frame, right? So that I'm matching what it's actually going to be like, and all of those kind of things. So sort of like a sensory experience, all the different things that are going to go into that, I think really can heighten that visualization and make it better. And then again, video is a good tool, and we have so much of that now at our disposal. You can throw a GoPro on your head, or somebody else has, and on their helmet, and you can get what feels like, first person viewpoint of doing things. And that can be a really good way to train our mind about what it's going to look like, especially if I'm trying to do something that I haven't done before, but somebody else maybe has done, and I'm trying to level up in that skill sense. I think that's a really good thing. Well, I used to be a water ski coach, and I would watch and coach other people from the boat skiing all day, and they maybe weren't at the skill level that I was at. And then if I went out and skied, I tended to replicate some of the things that I'd been seeing for the last 4 or 5 hours. But if I watched a pro who was better than me for even just a couple of minutes before I went out and skied, I started to kind of replicate the things I was seeing there. And it was something I didn't necessarily intentionally do right away. It just was happening because I was coaching, and then I would go out and ski, and I was like, oh, that was kind of not a very good set. And I'd be like, oh, I know this because I'm learning this actually in my classes, and applying it. It's like, oh, I've been watching it done not at the level that I'm trying to do it at. And that was then, I was visualizing it, but in an ineffective way.
Right. Like one of the things that I like to do on the trainer is if you have a 1 minute effort, close your eyes on the trainer and tie that 1 minute effort to something that's out on the road, something And now you're starting to take the feeling of that 1 minute high-end effort, which we've been talking about, and now you're tying it to the real world and going, oh, well, maybe at 45 seconds, I'm almost up with that hill. It's not that bad. I can get through the back end of it, or I know what this is going to feel like. And that can be a real benefit because instead of the feeling holding us back, now the feeling can be encouraging. And it's the exact same feeling. Right? We're experiencing the same 400 watts. We're experiencing the same heart rate at 170 beats per minute, but we're experiencing it with a different outlook, and that changes a lot. We're going to talk a lot more about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
I can tell you very early in my cycling career, I spent a whole lot of time out in rides, picturing being in the breakaway with some big name riders and doing a whole lot of visualization. And then one of my first pro races, I ended up in a breakaway with Horner, Ben Jack Maines, and one other guy. I took my pull at 500 watts, just about killed myself. And one of them yelled at me, "Don't slow down the group when you pull through."
Exactly.
I'm like, this isn't what I pictured at all.
That's perfect.
Yeah, no, but that's something where that's real world things. So then if if I was working with somebody in that context, those were things that I'd want to learn about that and figure out and say, hey, I'll tell people sometimes hey, this isn't like all sunshine and rainbows up here, maybe, kind of thing. Like it's pretty cutthroat or whatever. And maybe that's not, healthy, to Grant's point about there might be some anger, there might be some things going on, right? But how do I, in that moment, how do I leverage that, right? And then if I'm going to go into that world, if I'm going to go into that context, I've got to be prepared for that, right? And maybe I can't know what that's like, but if I can know what that's like, I can have somebody who's been there, and now that you've done it, right, you've had that experience, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go back into that arena again. How do I get myself better prepared for that, right? So that I'm not maybe caught off guard by some of that stuff where it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that.
I love it.
Before we end our conversation about visualization, let's hear from Dr. Ernst Hansen, who had a different experience with visualization techniques.
One year I prepared for the World Championships in cyclocross, and we went to look at the course before the race so that we could go back home and visualize our race. And I did that every night for months prior to the championship, and it was somehow very effective. So it had an effect, but at the same time, I actually felt that after the race, my mood went down a lot. And I suspect actually that it had something to do with all this mental training up to the race. So after that experience, I never did it again. I didn't like that experience.
Committed athletes reach a point where performance gains depend more on the skills they build between their ears than on the strength of their legs or their heart. The very best athletes are as strong mentally as they are physically. In the sports psychology pathway from Fast Talk Labs, we explore how to build mental skills with experts like Dr. Simon Marshall, Dr. Julie Emmerman, Grant Holicky, Leslie Patterson, and Julie Young. Build your mental strength. Visit Fast Talk Labs and explore the sports psychology pathway.
So moving down the line, so the next thing we kind of wanted to touch base on is this idea of, and again, this was something that was very, very in vogue when I was a young swimmer, and it still is. Every swim team on the planet and every junior team for most sports, we're going to have goal meetings. We're going to talk about goal setting. And I remember very early on in my master's education with you, I brought up this idea that I want to do something on goal setting. And the first thing you said was, let's make it goal attainment instead of goal setting. So I want you to speak a little bit about the difference between goal setting and goal attainment.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I don't think most people have really thought about it or unpacked it because it's so common in language. And it's not just in sport, it's in everything in life. You set goals, right? And when I first got into sports psychology, some of the things that bothered me is that people would be like, oh, you're the goal setting person, or you're like this motivational speaker. And I'm like, I don't motivate anybody. You motivate yourself. I help you figure out how to motivate yourself. And goal setting is actually not what we're trying to do. Like, we're trying to attain goals. And as a mental performance coach, I'm in the business of trying to help you attain your goals, not set goals. And when we think about it, it's goal setting for goal attainment. So the goal setting is to try to set you up to attain the goals. But where most people fall short with this is they set the goals and kind of just stop. It's sort of what I call the set it and forget it model. Or they do it maybe at the beginning of the season and we have these lofty goals and we set them or whatever, and then nobody really talks about how we're actually going to attain them, and we just start going into training and we never talk about our goals again. And it was like, well, we set our goals, we're supposed to accomplish them, right? What happened, kind of thing. And so it's working backwards. What are we trying to accomplish? And then, whatever that is. And I'm of the, proponent of saying, make it as big as you want. Like, I don't care if somebody comes in and says, I want to be an Olympian. I'm going to say, great, let's figure out what it takes to do that. Let's figure out where you're at in relation to that. And what can we do to try to move you closer to that pathway? But so many people will say like, oh, set SMART goals or blah, 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 or things like that. And one of the components of SMART goals is that it's realistic. And, it's this idea of realistic. It's like, well, no, we were just talking earlier about that person who set a world record. Well, if it's realistic, how are they, how are they going to do something that nobody's ever done before?
Right.
That's
not
unrealistic by nature, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm working with that person, I can't be telling them to set realistic goals, right? You're talking about trying to, win a race and go out and be in this lead pack, right? Like if I tell you to set a realistic goal, you would say, well, based on where I'm at right now, I should probably be fifth in the pack. So I'm going to try to aim to be fifth in the pack instead of trying to win the race. And it's like, and somebody might say, well, that's crazy for you to try to say you could win the race. You're not ready for that. And it's like, but how do I know until I try? And I got to put myself out there. And the thing with the mind is we have to set that thing out there quite a ways ahead of us to go try to chase it. And where I think most people want to set realistic goals is because they're afraid to set big, crazy goals, because then if they don't achieve them, and we'll talk about this more later on, our self-esteem gets tied to that. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm not good. I didn't achieve my goal. And it's like, well, you could have set a really easy goal and attained it, but you set a big goal and you didn't get it, but you got much further than you did had you set that easy goal, right? And so it becomes this idea of, Are we trying to push ourselves to be the best we can be, or are we just trying to check a box?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've started to see a lot lately is that goals and expectations are starting to become intertwined. I expect that I should be able to do this, two really dangerous words, in my opinion, in the world of sport. I should be here. And so what I start to listen to athletes do is maybe deep down inside them, they do have that big, lofty, huge goal, but they're like, well, okay, so I want to win the Cat 3 race here. Okay, yeah, well, we know that can happen. We know you can do that. Let's look for something a little bit bigger. Let's find what that piece is. And so you talked about going backwards, right? And starting and like, here's the goal. This is what I want to go do. Now, how do we create that pathway to get from A to B? And one of the things that, I'll mention a lot, and I know you say is, yeah, you can have that big lofty goal, but it's got to have some grounding in possibility, right? It's got to have some grounding in logic. If everything goes right, what's the pie in the sky? If everything is just lines up and our nutrition's dialed and this is that, what can we do? And that's a great starting point.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing with that too is I think a lot of times people don't even know what it takes. So like if I use that example, the person who says, I want to be an Olympian, right? Many times they have no idea what it actually takes to do that.
I would take it a step further to say most people, when they set those sorts of goals, completely underestimate the work, the time, the commitment it takes to hit that level.
Sometimes obsession. Yeah. I mean,
totally. And there's some level of happenstance involved with all this stuff too, right? Like, who are your competitors? People don't talk about that either, right? Like, maybe you're in a cycle, an Olympic cycle where it's just some of the best we've ever had, right? And then maybe there's another one that's maybe a little bit more down for various reasons or whatever, right? And so it's not diminishing anybody who made a team, like how strong it was. That's not the point of that. It's to say, do I understand what it takes and what it takes in general, right? So just a quick example of this is like, I'll use track and field just because it's easy. So in track and field, you got to be in the top 3 in the U.S. in your event, and then you also got to have the Olympic standard. But in general, if you're top 3, you're going to often have that standard, but not always, depending on the event. But let's just say it's the 10K, for example, right? Well, in the last 2 or 3 Olympic trials, what were the average top 3 times that got in, right? And it doesn't mean that the next one that's going to be exactly that, but it's going to be probably in the ballpark of that, right? So it's at least a place to start. And then let's say it's, for women's time, let's say it's 31 minutes or something like that, right? Just to pick a time. If I am currently, my PR is 32:30, let's say, and I'm trying to say I want to be an Olympian, and I've got to probably be somewhere in this 31-minute range, let's say hypothetically. Well, that means I've got to improve 1 minute and 30 seconds, right? On paper. But the likelihood you're going to run your PR at the Olympic trials is really low.
Right.
So I've actually probably got to be able to run even faster than that. And this is the part a lot of people miss when they're setting their goals, is they set their goal for what they think that thing is, instead of saying like, okay, this is a championship environment. That 31-minute time, they probably negative split the second 5K, and they probably like the last 2K really negative split.
Right.
Like, and so then it says, okay, like, can I get my PR to be fast enough to where I could run that type of race? And that's where it's like, because you could look and go, okay, maybe 1 minute 30, that's possible, right? But it's really probably more like you got to do like 2 minutes or 2 minutes and 30 seconds better, because taking that into account. So that just says, okay, that's in general what it hypothetically would take. And then where am I in relation to that? And then how do I ground myself in where I'm at? And what do I need to do to put myself in position to have the best chance, to your point about this sort of guarantee, or like I'm going to accomplish this goal kind of thing. It's the best chance to attain that goal. And when you think about it that way, then it frees you up to not have this pressure of fear of failure and all these other kind of things that come into, well, what if I don't get my goal?
Right.
And that's where it's like, that's not actually really what I'm interested in about. I'm interested in how close can you get to it.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting too, because one of the things you brought up, we used to talk about in swimming is cut times. There would be this cut time, it was 27:39. And everybody, that's my goal. Like, okay, so you just created the perfect race being that goal time. So what happens when you dive in and your pinky moves out of place? You're immediately going, I can't do it. If you set that time for faster, then you're giving yourself margin for error. Because like we talked about, no race is going to be perfect. No environment's going to be perfect. And now we've set up an opportunity to make some mistakes on the path to that. And Ken Ravizza used to talk about the path. You have to be able to visualize the path that takes you from where you are now to that end result. So when I'll do goal attainment meetings with athletes, I'll go, okay, and you guys bring up this great point. What's it going to take? What is it realistically going to take? What do you have to change about your life in order to do this?
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z.
And
then the next thing I'll ask them is, are you willing to do that? Because if you're not willing to do that, we need to modify the goal.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to touch on kind of the goal attainment. We talk about creating a path, and we'll talk about creating way markers along that path. And okay, how do I know that I'm on the path? I got to check every once in a while. It's not just from here to infinity.
Yeah.
I got to know where I am along the path. But one of the things you put in the notes is celebrate the achievements along the way. And I think that's such an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's lost a lot of times. And there's a culture in sport of I always have to stay hungry or I always have to be grinding or whatever, which I totally don't like that term because if you grind something too much, it gets dull. And if you grind it just right, it gets sharp.
Right.
It's not something you do every day necessarily. Otherwise, you won't have anything left to grind. You'll be burned out, as metaphorically speaking, right? And so celebrating the achievements is one of the ways to mitigate that, right? Is like I have to take into account my progress that I'm making. But for so many people, they think if I do that, I'm going to get complacent.
Right. I get soft.
Right. Or I'm going to get soft or whatever it is. And it's like, no, that's actually the opposite. It gives you, one, it gives you a little relief. It gives you a little like kind of, oh, yeah, I made it one more step closer, whatever kind of thing, right? But it also circles back into this intrinsic motivation context and process orientation and enjoying the process and enjoying those little steps along the way. And it doesn't have to be that I can only be happy when I attain my goal. If that's the case, you're going to be unhappy most of the time.
99%.
Right? And so it's like, why not be happy most of the time? And then, yeah, if I can attain this thing, great. But then it also doesn't create a dependency on that either, right? And people think, well, that's what drives you, that's what motivates you. And it's like, yes, that can be very motivating, but it comes with all these psychological side effects, right? It's like a prescription drug commercial or whatever, right? Yeah, this pill will lower your blood pressure, but it's going to like give you all these other horrible things with it. And they just rattled it off really quickly at the end, right? Well, that's what extrinsic motivation and avoidance motivation, fear driving type of things, that's what that does. It can be very motivating, but it comes at the psychological cost to your well-being. And that's why if you look at a lot of pro athletes' memoirs, they're kind of dark.
Yeah.
Like Jerry West's memoir is literally like titled My Charmed Tormented Life or something like that, right? Like it's like this idea that, and Jerry West was the person that the NBA little logo is modeled after, in the Hall of Fame for basketball, right? And so it's this idea that we tend to think everything's so great, right? And they maybe are driven to success, but they're also driven with all of these other negative things that come with it, right? And so if we can shift that to be more intrinsic, if we can shift that to be more fun-oriented, to enjoying what we're doing and celebrating those progress that we make along the way, that's just going to come back and fuel our motivation even more to do it because we love to do it, not necessarily just to achieve the outcome.
Yeah, and I think we see that in coaching now. We're seeing more of that in coaching in major sports. People like Pete Carroll, people that are creating this fun environment, this competitive fun environment for their players. Let's go have a good time. Fun is fast. I mean, I'll say it all the time. When we're having fun with my teams and my athletes, they're going fast. When we're grinding, maybe not so much. And it's something that you've said is enjoy the plateau. Enjoy this, I'm just here doing the work more than I'm enjoying the work. Like those two things can be different and they're really important.
This is why I'm so much more a fan of performance goals than results goals.
Yeah.
I think results goals take you to a really dark place. And I told you that story as a joke earlier, but I think it's a really good example of that when I was in that breakaway. If my goal had been to win that race, I would have been a very unhappy guy because I was a brand new Cat 1 in a breakaway with Chris Horner, who I gave him my best pull and he yells at me for going too slow.
Right. Right,
I wasn't winning
right.
that race.
Yeah, exactly.
He was going to rip my legs off no matter what I did. So I would have been very unhappy had it been a results focus. But instead, I left the race and went, I was in a 20-minute breakaway with Chris Horner in my third ever pro race.
Exactly.
That was a great performance.
Cycling's a really good example of this. Mark Cavendish was the very best sprinter in the world there for a 4 or 5 year period. And it wasn't close, right? If he got set up, he won. But he didn't win every race. He didn't win every sprint. If we're situated on, I want to win this, or I want to go this time, or I want to do those things, we're really setting ourselves up to be disappointed. But if we go through this process that you talked about, I want to put out the performance that is capable of doing those things for me, then I can pull a lot of positives and I can pull a lot of optimism for the next time out of those performances.
Well, Cavendish is a great example because you have a guy that at the height of his career, when the Olympics came around, he wanted to win the Olympics. He gave up on the tour. He gave up on pretty much every race that year for that Olympics. Got the Olympics, breakaway went up the road. He never even got a shot.
It was over. And then yet he won a world championship doing the opposite. He raced everything that season and raced worlds, and he won worlds. So I think it is about the effort, setting yourself up for the performance. That's why we call it mental performance training, not mental results-based winning.
Yeah.
So moving down the line, and this is a really nice segue because the next thing we want to talk about is the use of motivational and instructional self-talk. This is one of those things that I think every athlete does. They just don't know they do along the way. Everything we're doing in the moment is self-talk. Trevor might be yelling at himself, going, come on, you gotta go harder, because he gets a little bit motivated on anger.
Oh, no, I don't get angry with myself.
Oh, you get angry with others. I'm just going to be your whipping boy the next time we race together and be like, Trevor, for you to be successful, just yell at me the whole time, buddy. But we do it. We talk ourselves into stuff or we talk ourselves out of stuff. That self-talk is constant. But what is the difference here between an instructional self-talk or a motivational self-talk?
Yeah, in simple terms, motivational is what it sounds like. It's things that motivate me, right? And that could look like lots of different things like we were just talking about. It could be something like, I'm really great. Or there could be somebody who motivates themselves by saying, I really suck. And that motivates me, right? Now, where does that come from? That probably comes from somewhere along the line. They were taught that at a younger age, right? And was that a healthy mechanism? Maybe not what I would teach somebody from the start. But the point being is that positive self-talk. Okay, this is just a quick segue. Yeah. Everybody talks about positive self-talk. I don't talk about positive self-talk. I talk about effective self-talk. Yeah. And that's because this exact point, it gives space for the idea that, unless I get somebody, when they were born, they're not a blank slate. They've got these life experiences that maybe impact what their self-talk is like, right? And so say an athlete comes to me and they're like, yeah, I get really motivated by using what would be classified as negative self-talk. I'm not going to necessarily say, hey, let's make that your go-to mechanism. Let's work on some of these other things that could be a little healthier and a little more effective too. But I want you to understand why you have that and where that kind of comes from to some extent. But also, how can we leverage that? It doesn't have to be that negative is bad. Negative could be good in the particular context of, I'm trying to improve my performance. Now, when we step into saying my well-being, negative typically isn't going to be helpful.
Right.
But in the performance environment, there are some cases where people have developed various techniques or things over the years, and often it's unintentional. They don't even know they're doing it or why it's happening. Or maybe they were intentionally taught it by a coach, potentially, which that's a whole nother thing that we have to work on and change kind of thing. But that's a key piece in this conversation. So effective self-talk, and what does that look like? So from a motivational standpoint, things that motivate me, that get me going, that are going to drive me to, in this case, we're talking about endurance sports, continue to push through at the pace I'm going at, or to maybe even pick up the pace or whatever it might be. Instructional self-talk is things that are instructional in nature. So a simple way to think of it is coaching, right? Maybe it's relax my shoulders, or maybe it's, if I'm running, drive my knees or drive my arms if I'm going up a hill or something like that, or my posture, right? We get fatigued. If you're running, for example, you tend to hunch your shoulders over, whatever it might be kind of thing. So maybe I need to give myself an instructional cue of self-talk to get tall or whatever, or relax my shoulders, whatever it might be. It's things that are instructional in nature that we're telling ourselves that then are going to ideally give some kind of reaction to something that's going to help me perform better, right? If I'm on the bike, it might be something related to my cadence or something related to my race plan even, or strategy or whatever it is kind of thing. Maybe it's like, okay, this next mile or this next hill, right? I just got to take it one thing at a time, right? That's instructional in nature. And those are the two types of self-talk that we have found to be the most effective in most sports situations, but in particular in endurance.
I think the worst thing that ever happened to self-talk was Stuart Smalley's daily affirmations on Saturday. It was you're a good person. And gosh darn it, people like you.
Yeah,
that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about self-talk.
No, and both of these things can be used really effectively in a race environment. You know, you could very much see somebody with something written on their tape on their handlebars that says, hold the bars like an egg. That's instructional self-talk to help your handling. But then the motivational self-talk might be, this is worth it. This is who you're riding for. This is why. Those things, you know.
Meaning and purpose is a big one.
Yeah,
like
meaning
something
and
bigger
purpose.
than yourself.
And I think we're driven by those things. But everybody's different. And this is where, you know, I touched on it earlier. Eyes off, individual zone of optimal functioning works for all of us. And Trevor talks, and we joke about it, but Trevor does use anger for motivation. It gets him fired up. It gets you in tune to what's going on around you. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm the opposite end of the spectrum. I like to think about how it's fun. You know, if I'm at the end of a 1-minute climb, if I can smile or even enjoy it a little bit and go, yeah, this is awesome, I light up and everything lights up. So understanding, you know, kind of going back to where your positive experiences in the past have been, and then understanding what your mental state was and what you were thinking about and what you were holding on to in those moments is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's this idea of, and it's important, and we studied it and we talked about it. Me personally, I don't love the idea of flow or the zone. I mean, it happens, but it is almost, I said this to an athlete recently, it's almost by luck. And they were like, well, no, you can do stuff that give yourself a better chance to go there. But that comes back to eyes off. That comes back to your optimal zone. But flow and the zone, they kind of just happen.
We have a great side. We did an episode on time trialing. We have a great side in that one from Swain Tuff, where I talked to him about, you know, how he handles time trialing. He talks about, oh, I know I'm on a really good one when I get into the flow. But what was interesting about it is he didn't talk about, here's how I get into the flow.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's as you said.
Yeah.
Here's top time trial in the world going, sometimes it happens,
Sometimes it doesn't.
When it happens, it's great.
I was talking to Eric Bruner about this yesterday, and we were talking about nationals where he had the mechanical and he had all this, and then ripped off the 2 fastest laps that anybody had ever seen on that course. And I said, what do you remember about that? He goes, well, at first I was like, okay, the race is over. And I looked around and said, okay, I'll give this a shot. And then I went, oh, wow, I'm catching him. And then everything went blank for a couple laps. And that's flow, right? Like that's that you just rely on the subconscious.
And we know things that can preclude it. Like, so in that particular example, I would think, well, you kind of think the race is over. So you're like, well, what the heck? Let's see what happens, right? This is similar to like the 16 seed beating a 1 seed in March Madness or something like that. It's like, well, like Oakland or whatever, just beat Kentucky or whatever. And the guy hit like 10 3-pointers or something like that, right? Yeah. Like the other thing people don't talk about is how many he took to hit 10 threes. He took like 30, I think, or something like that. So yes, he hit 10, but he still failed a lot too. And that's in terms of their psychology and like doing that, right? Well, they were going out there going like, it's like the athlete going out and leading the race when they have no business doing it. Like, hey, I'm just going to see how long I can hold on. And maybe you get out there and you all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm feeling pretty good. And you get in the other people's head and they're like, who's this person? Guy? You know, like, you know, so Kentucky's sitting there kind of like, who's Oakland? Why are they still hanging with us? Right. You know, like, and so it's that idea. But I think what happens is when you mentally like give up, then it frees you up to have a better chance to get into flow. And this is why, to your point, I don't particularly like talking or teaching flow as a goal or this is what we're striving for, because in competitive sport, it's really, really difficult because it is outcome based. And while we talk a lot about the process and focusing on the process, there is still an outcome, right? And a quick example I use is like, we're here in Colorado. I love skiing. You know, if I go up on the mountain and I just ski, I can get into flow fairly easily, I would argue. If you put gates at the top, and you put gates at the bottom, and you put a time on it, and you give me a trophy and you put other people out there competing against me and maybe let's throw some prize money in, some sponsorships, right? Suddenly my ability to get in flow, it's a totally different context, right? Yep. And so that's why it's not necessarily for me about getting into flow, because flow seems similar to like we were talking about perfection almost, or like these everything goes well. It's like, no, like it's not everything's going to go well. Let's prepare for that with that context. And let's prepare for when it doesn't go well. How do I respond? Because that's really what determines success long term.
Right.
And really what determines whether or not somebody's going to be a champion in whatever it is not about everything going well or being in flow per se, even as much as it is when it didn't go well, how did I respond and still find a way to get it done?
So let's tie this to self-talk. One of the most important things we can do is that stressful environment. How do we start to view that stressful environment as a challenge environment? Self-talk, both motivational and instructional, can help us in that place.
Yep.
You know, we'll talk about making sure we're practicing in that same stressful environment. This is why competition and training is a really good idea.
Yeah.
Well, we'll do it in the little cross practices. Even if we're doing a little mini 4-lap race, I'm going to put a prize at the end of that race because now people are, or I'm just going to make it about their pride briefly. Mm-hmm. It might be in a joking way, but I'm going to make it about something.
Yeah.
So one really important thing here, though, if you're coming up with your self-talk and you're hearing this about dealing with the stressful situations, don't think for a minute that you can start doing the self-talk of, don't be stressed. You're fine. You're going to be stressed.
Right.
Like one of the best sports psych moments I ever had, I'm blanking on his name right now. It was an athlete who won the gold medal in the skeleton.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about, he made the mistake early in his career and doing all that sort of stuff, trying to reduce stress and get into that flow state. And he said that was really easy to do at the local races. He's like, in skeleton, there's only one race that matters.
Yep.
It is the Olympics. It lasts 1 minute long. And forgive my language, he said, if you don't think you're going to be shitting a brick on that start line, you got another thing coming to you.
Yep. And you have to look at that stress and go, this is good. Why do I have the butterflies in my stomach? It's adrenaline. I need the adrenaline. Like, how do we tie these things in a self-talk that comes out on the other end in a positive way?
Yeah. How do I leverage that, right? And that comes back to that individual zone of optimal functioning. There's a point where too much of that is problematic, but that could look different for each person to some degree. And part of that is how you perceive it and your ability to manage that, right? So in those cases, like, yeah, absolutely. You're not going to just be super relaxed kind of thing. In my dissertation research, I was interviewing an Olympic medalist, world record holder, and they were talking about being in the blocks and they felt relaxed and they were like, this isn't good.
That's that problem I have.
You know, like, so they made a change. They had tools to adjust, and that was part of what they told me and talked about. But it was the idea that most people would think that would be the goal, is try to be relaxed, and that was a good thing, right? But there's a certain amount of it. It's like, and this is where I talk about this with things like meditation and stuff like that, right? It's very helpful and we need to do it, but I can't meditate while I'm doing a physical activity, sport that might be a really high intensity, right? Now, are there concepts from meditation that are going to help me in that? Yes, absolutely. But the physiological state is really different. And that's something that I think, you know, but we were talking about that with the visualization and stuff like that, you know, and so it all comes back to that. I think a lot of times people misconstrue that, right? And so then that self-talk in that moment, do I have mechanisms that I go to help me with that? Or do I start to go down the ineffective path?
Well, I think it's interesting because you have those athletes at really high levels that throw up before every game. People are like, that's got to be bad. Well, no, they kind of are to that really heightened place, and that may just cause them to throw up. So got to know what's coming. Maybe you need to get extra food here somewhere, like plan for it. But how do you mitigate and get into that place where you've hit your little zone? And for some people, that's very high stress and very highly peaked up. And for some people, it's this combination. Like for me, I'm having fun, but there's this underlying layer of, let's go. I've got caffeine in me. I want to go. I'm jacked up.
Yeah.
But I've learned how to almost embrace that, have fun with that. And that's where we've got to go.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's, you know, it's different for everybody. And I think there's some things that if we can, you know, going back to a build it model, train people ideally, sometimes we don't have the time and space to do that. And so then it's just doing the best we can with what we have. But I think in some of those cases too, we can train people, especially if it's more earlier on and we're exposed to these things at younger ages. Then you've got years of developing this, right? We talk about like developing expertise and stuff like that. It's like, so, okay, I've been training for cycling for 10 years. But if I haven't been intentionally training my mind for 10 years, then, like I talk about training age a lot. And just what you're talking about made me think of this is like, from a training age standpoint, I'm much more novice in terms of my mindset and stuff like that. And so even when you start doing this stuff, it's keeping in mind that like, okay, come back and talk to me when you've got 5 years of working on this, right? Because you've been doing this other thing for 5 years. You've been training this other skill for this amount of time, and you didn't just get great at that overnight. Right. And some days you're going to be able to have really effective self-talk, and it's going to seem like, hey, I'm on top of this. And some days there are going to maybe be other distractors and things going on, and it's not going to be as good. And that's okay. Just like, we have good days and bad days with, other things. And I think that's the other thing too, is people will get in their head then about that, because it doesn't, like, I can't do it all the time, or I'm not good at it or something like that. And it's like, no, this is something, again, that we talked about. It takes consistency and it takes time. And it evolves.
Well, and if we do it early on, then as we raise levels, we've all seen those great athletes as they get older, as they get faster, they never seemed like they had any trouble with it. And then they got to the high level and they suddenly freaked out. If that person had those skills all along and worked those skills all along, maybe they'd be more ready for that level. But we assume that some of these, they're just stronger. They just have the mental capability for it. And at some point, they're going to be challenged to a point where they don't anymore.
Yeah.
And that may be the Olympics. It may not be till the Olympics.
No, I think that's why a lot of people don't formally work on mental training, because especially when I meet somebody in college, let's say, or whatever, or you meet somebody, in an elite athlete context, and that's when you start working with them, they maybe haven't intentionally worked on this a lot. Because what happens when you're young, and we know this from a physical development standpoint, like, if you like hit puberty sooner than some people, or, you've got exposure to some better coaching or training, right? Like early on, you can mask having a poor like mental strength by having really good physical capabilities and skills or whatever and stuff like that. And so when you're 10, 12, 14 years old and you're the best kid in your town, maybe you're the best kid on your team, great, right? Like, I'm at Adams State, University, working with the cross country and track and field team. You could be the best kid in your state, and you might not even make the team potentially, right? Like, and so every kid that comes in, it's like, you're not even just the best in your town or whatever. It's like, now you're the best in the state, maybe the best in the region, maybe the best in your country. And when you start looking at it that way, and then you bring a team together of those people, now everybody on the team was a state champion maybe, or something like that, right? Or whatever it is. And that's not necessarily that everybody is a state champion, but it's from a standpoint of like, how do I shift that? And when we start training it in a proactive, build it manner, then it's not saying, because like when we look at that 10-year-old kid who's looking like they're beating everybody else out there, they're able to be competent because they just know they're better than the other kid. Hey, I'm like 6'1" or whatever, and the rest of you all are like 5'7" or whatever. Like, great, I'm gonna like.
It's easy to be confident in that place.
It's easy to be confident then, right? Like, but then when you meet your match, like you're saying, whatever level that comes at, for some kids, it's just to make the team, right? To make that cut or whatever it is. For some kids, I'm the best on the team, and it's when I get to the championships and I'm against everybody else who's the best on their team. That's when all of a sudden I feel it and I'm not as confident. And it's like, well, because you weren't actually training it, and it just was getting masked, because we have a tendency to think, well, if this person's winning, they must be mentally strong. They must have it together.
Yep.
And they maybe don't actually at all. And in a lot of cases, we find out they don't, because when they do meet their match, the wheels can come off the bus to some extent.
Best thing you can learn as a kid is to struggle.
You
need to learn. I had a friend in high school who was a phenomenal local tennis player.
Mm-hmm.
I remember trying out for our high school tennis team, and he was beating all of us with one hand in his pocket, because that's how much better he was than all of us. And he did the thing where he went down to Florida to see if he could become a professional tennis player. As you said, everybody down there was just as talented as him, but he had never learned how to work. He had never learned how to struggle, and he did not last long.
And this brings us to our last point. One of the things that we want to touch on is this idea of how do we build that self-confidence so that we're capable in every environment? What are some of the really important things that we need to have that we're going to be able to use to build that confidence?
Yeah, in short, it's building that from the inside out. For many of us, we either taught this or we develop it as we go through life, where our confidence is derived from the outside in. What I mean by that is we look to external things to build our confidence instead of trying to build it from the inside out, looking within ourselves. There's this idea that I don't give people anything necessarily. They have it within them already. I'm helping them access it to some extent.
Yep.
And that's a key piece in confidence, is I can be confident in who I am regardless of these external things. So if we use in the context of a sport performance, you think of it as like a target on the outside of this like target kind of thing is athletic performance, right? And if the arrow from athletic performance goes into the middle of the target, as we go through that, the first layer is your confidence, the second layer is your identity, and then the inside is your self-esteem. And so if I perform well, and we use, let's say, cycling as an example, I race well in my race, I'm confident. My identity is really wrapped up in being a cyclist. I'm a good cyclist now because I won my race. And then my self-esteem is in a good spot because I'm a good cyclist. I won the race. And maybe everybody's telling me that externally, how good I am because I won the race. Now that seems, okay, that's cool. That works, right? The problem with that is, let's run through that scenario really quickly again, but I didn't win the race.
Yep.
My confidence goes down because my confidence is highly dependent on whether or not I won the race or how well I did in the race. And then my identity is really wrapped up in being a cyclist. And now I don't think I'm a good cyclist based on this external feedback I'm getting from whether it's my placement, my time, what people are telling me, what my coach is telling me. And then my self-esteem is in the tank because I see myself only as a cyclist. And right now I'm not a very good cyclist based on this external feedback I'm getting.
Right.
Now, if we spin that the other way and we build it from the inside out, it's saying, start at the core, start with your self-esteem, self-compassion, this idea that I can accept myself for who I am, regardless of how I perform. And if I can start there, then I'm not as reliant on the external stuff. And then we go to identity. You're more than an athlete, okay? There's other things in your life where we talk about this person-first approach. When you can ground yourself with that and really believe that and see that and actually invest in some of those other areas, then I can continue to move on and I can be confident. I can be confident in who I am as a person and be confident in that I've got other aspects of who make up who I am as a person. And then that frees me up to go out and try to achieve and attain these goals and all these other things we've talked about and see how well I can perform. And if I get that where I want to go, great. If I don't, it's not that that doesn't suck in that moment, but it's not like the wheels come off the bus and I just go into the spiral because I have these other things. I can come back and go, hey, you know what? My confidence isn't solely derived on how I did in this bike race or how I did on this training ride or whatever it was. Or it's not based on what my FTP score is or whatever this other stuff is, you know? And so it's all of these other external things that, especially in endurance sports, we get very numbers oriented with a lot of things. It's saying, no, like that's giving me some feedback, but that doesn't define who I am. I'm not defined by my FTP score or my VO2 max or like how well I did in this race. There's other things that make me up as who I am as a person.
Well, and it's even taking some of those things and going, I work hard, I work towards my goals, I'm not willing to give up. Those are things that are very valuable in life and across the board. And I think we're watching athletes, even if they're not racing, get really obsessed with how much work they're doing in a data-driven model to say, like, I'm doing work, see? And I think you have to be able to know that internally. Well, I'm doing work, I'm overcoming struggle, I'm doing these things. The numbers, all those things, yeah, they're nice. It's nice to track. You want to know. But if you're defining your happiness and your self-worth on those, you're in for a big deal of trouble.
Yeah, and there's an element too where it leads to what I see a lot in endurance sports, which is overtraining. People overtrain to try to build their confidence. The idea that, well, I just need to do more. If I do more, I'll be more confident. The more training I have, the more confident I am,
The
right?
higher my TSS
and there's a
is, the
point
more
of
confident
diminishing returns with that. There's this idea of belief in my training method and trusting my training and trusting myself and knowing that I can go out and do this. And where I see a lot of it happen is they're like, oh, well, I don't know if I'm prepared or if I don't know if I'm ready or I didn't hit this time in my workout and my race is Saturday and it's Tuesday and this was sort of my pre-race workout or whatever that's supposed to tell me I'm primed, ready to go, right? And it's like, well, if you believe you're primed and ready to go, yeah, the numbers do matter to some extent, but there's also an element of like the gun's going to go off or whatever. That race is going to start whether you think you're ready or not, right? Like, and either you're going to go to the line and you're going to try to get the best out of it that you can, or maybe you don't go to the line, and that's okay too. But don't go to the line and just hope and pray or guess or whatever like that. You know what I mean? Or don't go to the line and say, oh, well, I had a bad workout on Tuesday, so this race on Saturday is going to suck. I don't even, I'll just see what happens, like see if my legs feel good. That's a classic one. Runners like to say, I'll see if my legs feel good. And it's like, I don't mean to be mean, but I don't really care how your legs feel. Like if you're going to go run the race, we've got to figure out a way to get you to be able to run the race as best you can.
Yeah, I would say the analogy, and some people like this, some people don't, but the analogy I always give athletes when you're talking about confidence is thinking about the sun rising every morning. How often do you stress about whether the sun's coming up or not?
That's something you can be confident about.
You don't, because you are confident tomorrow morning the sun's coming up.
Right.
And to me, confidence in ourselves is something similar, where our self-esteem is strong enough that it's not you're confident because you focus on it. It's confidence because you don't need to.
Mm-hmm.
So confident person doesn't need to brag, just like you don't get up every morning and go, oh my God, the sun is amazing. It came up again. But failure and mistakes, it's pretty hard for them to hurt that self-esteem as well.
Right.
And I'm sure some people are going, well, that's loser talk. You don't want to fail. Well, I hate to tell you, if you're trying to accomplish anything,
better fail.
Failure is a big part of life. And if it starts taking apart your self-esteem, overall, you're going to struggle. If you can get through those and keep your self-esteem, that's your best chance at being successful in the long run at whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and I think one of the really big pieces, and kind of we're rolling into our takeaways right here, right? That was yours. Is that your takeaway, or do you want your own?
Kind of was. But
okay.
Yeah, let's roll in. We'll use that as mine, so you go next.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things with this, for me as a takeaway, is this idea that what is it that you want to be as a person? Not what do you want to achieve? What do you want people to look at you and know? Did you fight through the hard moments? Did you go to the line and put your best effort out every single day, no matter what? Did you pursue this goal with dogged determination, whether you got there in the end or you didn't get there in the end? Who are you? And so much of what we do as mental strength is about who that person is. And so what we learn in terms of mental strength of how to push through when you flat or when you get dropped or when those things happen in a race, they're so applicable to life. Right? Like, am I going to give up when this happens, or am I going to keep going? So this whole idea for me is the performance, my effort and my presence and my joy and those things in the performance are what matters. It has nothing to do with what that performance gives me in the end. And to me, that's really what we're trying to build here and what we want to talk about with this.
So, Brian, we're most of the way through here, but since you're new to the show, we finish with what we call our 1-minute take-homes. Each of us has 1 minute to give our most salient point. So you got ours. What's your thought? What's the most important thing for our audience to take away from this?
So you need to boil your whole master's program into 1 minute. Go.
Yeah, no, I think we touched on a lot of good points. I mean, I think person first, like we talked about, we're training people to think more effectively, build it approach. This is a proactive thing. There's no point where you can't start too early. The more you can do it, the better it's going to be. Maintenance, consistency is really, really key. And then the last thing I'll say that, both of your points were very good, is separating our identity from who we are versus what we do. Like cycling is something I do. Running is something I do. It's not who I am. And I think, while there might be some benefits to that way of looking at it, I think there's way more things that are detrimental to it, not only for your performance, but also just for your own well-being and in life. There's nothing in sport, in my opinion, that's worth sacrificing our well-being, our physical and mental health to try to achieve that. If you talk to all the people who ever accomplished these things, many of them, when they're really pushed into a corner, will say the same thing. And if they don't, it's probably because they haven't worked and unpacked all the stuff that happened to them in that process that, did that kind of thing. So it's keeping in mind that this is something that we're very fortunate to be able to get to go do these activities and things like that we're doing, and to pursue sport and do that. Like it's an opportunity. And something that I learned from Coach Martin at Adams State University is this idea that you always want to take advantage of every opportunity you get. And one of the things we talk about in mental training is sort of this idea of preparing in a way so that when you have the opportunity, you're ready for it. Instead of being like, oh, I missed that opportunity. I wasn't ready for it, right? I wasn't mentally prepared. Like, we physically prepare, but are we mentally preparing, right? And, that's the last thing I'll finish with, is that those things happen at the same time. We physically and mentally train at the same time. And when you start looking at it that way, you start to see, hey, there's a lot of places where I can be incorporating this not only into my training and my competition, but also into my life.
Well said. So, Grant, my original take home was going to be talking about the self-talk that I do before a race.
Yeah.
Far and away the most powerful one. I just sit there and repeat, goddamn Grant Holicky. Goddamn Grant Holicky.
And I sit there the whole time and go, hey, Trevor, isn't this fun?
Goddamn Grant Holicky.
Well, Brian, thanks for coming in. That was, we really enjoyed that. Thanks for that insight. And hopefully you guys took some things out of that you can put into practice in your sporting and daily life.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Pleasure having you on the show. That was another episode of Fast Talk. The thoughts and opinions expressed on Fast Talk are those of the individual. Subscribe to Fast Talk wherever you prefer to find your favorite podcast. Be sure to leave us a rating and a review. As always, we love your feedback. Tweet us at Fast Talk Labs. Join the conversation at forums.fasttalklabs.com or learn from our experts at fasttalklabs.com. For Dr. Brian Zuleger, Dr. Ernst Hansen, Dr. Simon Marshall, and Grant Holicky, I'm Trevor Connor. Thanks for listening.